Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to rank in all 30 Hypercharges in the game right now, from the very worst all the way up to the very best. So I'm going to be doing this in a tier list format this time around, just to make it a little bit more easier to understand. And of course, with so many Hypercharges, it's pretty difficult just to completely put them in one number. So, of course, before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, trying to get close to 250k. Really appreciate you guys' support. And without further ado, let's jump into it then. So the first brawler that we're going to be ranking is going to be Brock. So Brock's Hypercharge is one of the new ones that came out. Everyone thought that it was going to be absolutely insane, and to me it's terrible. I think it's the only Hypercharge in the game where it makes their super worst. You might argue that it makes it for more consistent damage, but I still just don't think that's the case. After trying it out a lot, it's not even good whatsoever. You may as well just use the Hypercharge itself for the stat boost, because the super itself is terrible. I would not recommend buying this Hypercharge. So next up in the F tier, we have Miko's Hypercharge. So it takes so long to cycle through to his Hypercharge, so that's a big negative. With Miko, it's just hard to get a lot of damage and to cycle through to his first super, so you probably only get one Hypercharge in a match, and then even if you do, it's just really hard to pull off ultimate value on it, because typically you want to pop your Hypercharge just for the stat boost, and then maybe at the end, once you've got a kill, use your super once the Hypercharge is about to run out, so then you get that Hypercharge super. But then even if you use it that way, it doesn't always guarantee value. Sometimes the opponent's weak, sometimes the opponents can just run all the way back and avoid it completely. For me, this Hypercharge just completely sucks. And lastly, in the F tier, we have Pearl's Hypercharge. So again, this Hypercharge is fundamentally flawed. Main reason being is because of the Hypercharge super. It knocks some out of the Hypercharge super when you use it, which is just crazy to me. The only reason you want to use it is for the stat boost, and even then it takes Pearl so long to cycle to a Hypercharge. You probably only get one if you're lucky a game, so for me this Hypercharge is completely worthless. Now moving on to the D tier, starting off with Charlie. So Charlie's Hypercharge, I started to like it a little bit more, and then she got another supercharge rate which affects her Hypercharge rate, so I put it down a ranking for me. Main reason being, it's just so hard to actually get a Hypercharge now, and even so, the extra spiders that she gets with it doesn't really affect her too much. The best thing about it is just a speed boost and whatever else, so I would say this Hypercharge is very lackluster. The next up in the D tier, we have Sprout's Hypercharge. So for me, again, this Hypercharge is just pretty terrible with Sprout, because pretty much all of the time the opponents aren't going to get any damage dealt to them because they have brain cells. The only way that this is useful is in Heist, but still other brawlers that have Hypercharges are just way better in Heist, and even brawlers without Hypercharges deal more consistent damage than a Sprout. So for me, there's other Hypercharges that are just worth it overall. He still gets a decent stat boost. He still can be usable now in Knockout because of his Hypercharge, but I just think a lot of other brawlers have flashier supers. So next up in the D tier, we have El Primo's Hypercharge. So I've overrated this a lot when it last came out a couple of months ago. I thought that it was going to make him one of the best brawlers in the game, and it's pretty much done nothing. All it is a super that sucks them closer towards you, but if anything with Primo, you're guaranteed to hit the opponents after you super with a normal super. So for me, the only thing that's good about it is the stat boost. The Hypercharge super itself is terrible. And lastly, in the D tier, we have Crow's Hypercharge. So it might be towards the C tier now, since the slight rework to it, you get a bit more consistent damage, so I might be underrating it, but at the same time, it still takes Crow forever to get his Hypercharge super, and even then, you're so squishy when you jump in. Most of the time when you jump in with a Hypercharge, you're pretty much dead, so it's just pretty hard. It has made him a bit more viable in Heist, but I still just find other brawlers a lot more consistent. Now moving on to the C tier. So the C tier, these Hypercharges are pretty decent overall. I wouldn't be sad if I got this from a star drop, but at the same time, other brawlers have flashier supers and can make better plays. So the first brawler on the C tier is Spike. So Spike's Hypercharge, the main reason why he was even considered good in the past is because he could cycle through Hypercharges pretty quickly. Now that it takes like 3 supers to get a Hypercharge, it's just very rare that you're going to make that pop-off moment. His damage also got nerfed recently as well, so just meaning he can just get less value out of it overall. It's like a loose super in terms of the amount of coverage it does on the map, but other than that, it's not really the best Hypercharge. So next up in the C tier, we have Shelly's Hypercharge. So the only good thing about it really is the fact that she cycles for it quickly, especially when she's facing off against tanks, and that's when you only really use Shelly in Brawl and Gem Grab. Everywhere else, it's not really the best. It takes a while if she has a tough matchup to get through the Hypercharge, and it only increases the super width by like 20% or something, so it's not even that strong really. Just the stat boost itself and the extra damage is the main reason reason why you want this Hypercharge. So next up in a C tier, we have Tick's Hypercharge. So there's a couple good ways that you can use this Hypercharge Tickhead. You want to use it aggressively, especially like as close to the opponents as possible, because it's a very fast Tickhead. You can deploy it pretty quickly, but still in Knockout and Bounty, it takes forever to cycle through to his Hypercharge. It takes 4 Tick Supers, which is a big factor when you're looking at ranking Hypercharges. So sometimes in Knockout and Bounty, you don't even get this Hypercharge, and even if you do, sometimes the opponents can just take down the Hypercharge pretty quickly if you mess up the placement. And even so, against noobs, it probably is going to be pretty good, because they'll just walk into the Tick mines that deal 4k damage, which is pretty insane. But still, at high level, I feel like this Hypercharge is too easy to counter. So next up in the C tier, we have Jackie's Hypercharge. So you get an extra slowing effect when you use this Hypercharge Super. This used to be absolutely insane before they nerfed Hypercharge itself, and they also removed the damage, extra damage she gets with it. So I feel like that's definitely hurt her a lot, but it's still pretty good. You see a lot of Jackies in Brawl because of his Hypercharge. They can still make those game-changing plays, and the good thing is you can just brainlessly play Jackie, and you know, after a couple of deaths, you've got that Hypercharge Super, and you can just easily get a T-wipe with it. So I still feel like in the right hands, it's a very good Hypercharge. The next up in the C tier, we have a Buzz's Hypercharge. So essentially, you get infinite supers once you pop your Hypercharge, which can be really good in like heists to get across the map and make some good plays. But I still feel like by the time the 5 seconds is over, the opponents can just take you down afterwards. And even so, most of the good Hypercharges you want to use to try and get a couple of kills or anything else, you strictly really use Buzzes for mobility. That's the best way to use it. And then sometimes you can get a kill with it with the extra stat boost, but I feel like there's better, flashier Hypercharges out there, and it still takes Buzz quite a while to get this Hypercharge Super. So next up in the C tier, we have Belle's Hypercharge. So to begin with, a lot of people are saying this is like the worst Hypercharge in the game, but after testing it out a lot, I think it's severely underrated. It's that underrated that the dev team had to nerf his Hypercharge charge rate from 2 supers to 2.5 supers. It's so good in an open scenario. You can just launch your Hypercharge Super from a mile away. You'll know it will connect, and then you can just 2-tap opponents with the speed boost and everything else. So I think the stat boosts are the main reason why it's so good. So now moving on to the B tier. So most of these Hypercharges can be pretty game-changing, but they do still have some drawbacks. We're going to be starting off with Jean's Hypercharge called Hyper Hands. So this splits off into 3 different hands. So I know I said this Hypercharge probably isn't the best, but after switching star power to Spirit Slap, I think this Hypercharge is underrated. There's still a big drawback to it. It takes forever to cycle through it, but I think in Brawl Ball, Gem Grab, you can get a lot of pressure with it. You're probably only going to get 1 Hypercharge a game, but if you can Spirit Slap onto 2 opponents and take them down so quickly, it's going to change the game. So for me, I think it's pretty underrated, but it's not like OP or anything. So next up in the B tier, we have Cordelius's Hypercharge. So this used to be an A tier Hypercharge, but the recent nerfs to Cordelius definitely hurt him, especially with his Hypercharge. So it takes more shots to get his Super, so this affects his Hypercharge as well. So that's why I just put it low in the rankings. I thought anyways it took like 2 or 3 supers to get, well, it took 3 supers to get his Hypercharge. Now it's going to take even longer, so sometimes you don't even get a Hypercharge in a game. And the Hypercharge itself is pretty good, but still, just with Shadow Realm, you should be able to get a kill most of the time. It just guarantees the kill even more so. So for me, I think this Hypercharge is good, but it's not going to break the game. So next up in the B tier, we have Bull's Hypercharge. So whenever you use your Hypercharge Super, you will literally tank so much damage. I think it's 80%, which is crazy. So the best way to use this Hypercharge is to Super and then tap your Hypercharge button when you know there's a lot of damage raining onto you. The reason for that is because you don't want to waste the Hypercharge duration, especially because it's only 5 seconds. And then you can cycle through a couple of Bull's Hypercharges, because you can easily get like 1-2 kills with this Hypercharge Super, but still, Bull isn't really the strongest even with his Hypercharge. Next up in the B tier, we have Rose's Hypercharge. So she'll get a slowing circle around her, and she'll just get some extra stat boost as well. That's the main reason why it's actually so good, because if you give Rosa any type of speed boost, it's just going to make her very strong, and that's what she gets. Of course, she also got a Hypercharge buff in the last update as well, so just making it a little bit stronger. But the reason again why it's just so good, because it makes her so tanky. You just guarantee kills pretty easily, and she's just a menace on maps with a lot of grass. So next up in the B tier, we have Colt's Hypercharge. So the Hypercharge itself isn't really that good. It just makes the bullet storm a little bit bigger, so it's easier to connect onto brawlers. That's not the main reason you want to use it. It's just a stat boost. You can make some good plays with a speed boost and just get a lot of pressure. You can cycle through Hypercharges pretty quickly as well, and in heist you can deal so much damage with a safe with this Hypercharge. So for me, I think it's a pretty decent Hypercharge. So in the B tier, we have Fang's Hypercharge. So in terms of the pop-off potential, it is really high. You can get some good team wipes, But the biggest drawback, it takes forever to cycle through to this Hypercharge. I think it takes 4 supers at least to get it, which against good players, you're never really going to get a Hypercharge super. And even then, people have learned to kind of keep their distance. Even when there's like walls around, you just got to run away as quickly as possible. But when it's a nice open map, you will get a lot of value with this Hypercharge. It's received so many nerfs in the past. It's still pretty good, but it's not game breaking anymore. Finally, in the beta, we have Maisie's Hypercharge. So the potential and a team wipe potential is still insane with this Hypercharge. It still just takes forever to get it. The main problem is because Maisie received a supercharge rate nerf a couple of updates ago, and that pretty much killed her in the meta. It takes 4 shots to get 1 super, so it just takes a long time to even get to that Hypercharge. But once you do, you can get a team wipe with it, so that's the reason why it's in the beta. Moving on to the A tier Hypercharge brawlers. So typically, you're going to get a lot of value out of these Hypercharges, and it's going to make the brawler so much better. Without it, they're going to be pretty weak. So the first brawler is going to be BB. So BB's Hypercharge is actually really strong. It's really fun as well. You get the speed boost and you get the shield boost. I think the shield boost actually helps BB so much. It allows it just to push forward, be a lot tankier, and just create more plays. And the fact that you cycle through to this Hypercharge really quick, I think it takes 2 supers to get. It means you're going to cycle through 2, maybe 3 Hypercharges a game, and that's enough to win you some games. So in the A tier, we have Colette's Hypercharge. So this Hypercharge will always be pretty strong. Main reason being is because of the team wipe potential. You can cycle through a couple of Hypercharge supers, and especially in Heist, it deals 25% damage. Until they nerf that, or maybe buff the Heist safe, it's forever going to be at least an A tier Hypercharge. And like I said, if you can cycle through a couple of Hypercharges, that's 50% to the Heist safe, and that's just one of the strongest in the game for sure. So next up in the A tier, we have Jesse's Hypercharge. So the Hypercharge turret itself isn't like game breaking, but it's still a lot of HP. 10,000 health. It's going to be really annoying for the opponents to deal with, but it's the fact that you cycle through to the Hypercharge so fast now. Since the Hypercharge buff rate like 4 months ago now, it's just made Jesse such a better brawler. You can literally cycle within like less than 2 supers to get a Hypercharge, and then you think of the stat boost as well, the damage, the speed. It just makes Jesse so good, especially on maps with unbreakable walls. How are you going to destroy this Hypercharge turret? And by the time they've destroyed the Hypercharge turret, you probably have another turret available, and then you have the next Hypercharge available. So the cycling with this Hypercharge is insane. Next up in the A tier, we have Lose Hypercharge. So Lose Hypercharge, it instantly freezes people, which is so good for gaining map control and just deleting brawlers in an instant. Pretty much every Hypercharge that you throw at someone, they're pretty much dead. It doesn't matter if they're the highest HP brawler in the game like Frank or the Squishiest, they're dead no matter what. And it can just allow you to cycle through to your next super. So the main reason why it's not as broken as before is because of the supercharge rate nerf. So it takes a little while to get Lose first super, but then you can start the cycling just like Jesse's. So for me, it's easily an A tier Hypercharge still. Lastly, in the A tier, we have Max's Hypercharge. So I think this has potential to be one of the best for sure, but there's a few bugs with it. I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but essentially you have to stand still when you pop this Hypercharge super, because Max throws the energy drink and you have to stand still, like I said. So that's a big drawback, but you do get that extra movement speed and a 25% supercharge rate. If you know how to kind of abuse it, you can literally all stand in one spot and you all get a 75% supercharge rate. So that could actually be really strong. But I think what they should do in the future is just make it so it just lands onto your teammates no matter what, because that super lasts an extra, I think it lasts 3 times as long, so you can get that speed boost for so incredibly long. And you think of Max, all of his speed boosts combined, you're literally flying across the map. You can literally get from one side of the Brawl pitch to the other and just score within a flash. So for me, this Hypercharge is so underrated and can have potential to be S tier. So now finally moving into the S tier Hypercharges. So I recommend buying these ones with gems, coins, whatever. You'd need to buy these ones for sure. They change the brawler completely. So the first one is going to be Nita's Hypercharge called Hyperbarian. So I wouldn't say it's like the flashiest Hypercharge out there, but the main reason why it's so strong, it takes 2 supers to get this Hypercharge. If you can cycle through Bruce Bears galore, the opponent's just going to spend the whole game shooting Bruce Bears. A 10k HP Bruce Bear that gets additional movement speed is just crazy. It's not going to make Nita like game breaking, but on the maps she was already strong on, it's just going to make her so overwhelmingly strong. I think it's very underrated by the majority and definitely an S tier Hypercharge. The next up in the S tier, we have Dynamite's Hypercharge. So this has received some some nerfs in the past, so it takes a little while to cycle through to his Hypercharge, but once you do, it just equals a team wipe pretty much every single time. It drops a nuke onto the opponent, 7.5k damage with a demolition star power. That's insane. And then if one of your dynamites hit as well, that's like 10k damage, and then you can cycle through to your next Hypercharge super. The team wipe potential is insane. If you're a good dynamite player, you'll be able to change the game completely with this, so I definitely recommend getting this Hypercharge. Next up in the S tier, we have Edgar's Hypercharge. So this has received a few nerfs and a few tweaks down the line, but I still think is absolutely insane. So you get an additional super gain and also reload speed buff when you use this Hypercharge super, and just makes Edgar so incredibly strong. The biggest drawback is that you no longer charge your Hypercharge through gadgets anymore, but after adjusting and learning how to play Edgar a little bit differently, you can still cycle a couple of Hypercharges a game, and especially against the casual player base, this Hypercharge is just dumb broken. So next up in the S tier, we have Sandy's new Hypercharge, which is just crazy strong in the meta right now. It's catapulted Sandy to one of the best brawlers in the game easily. You get an additional 20% movement speed for not only yourself but your teammates in the sandstorm. You silence opponents for 0.5 seconds, and it just equals team wipes. Normally Sandy's super will just equal map control, and then you'll be able to take over, but that's not even the case anymore. You just run all over them completely so fast, and you just team wipe and then score goals and Brawl so easily. This Hypercharge is so insane, and the best thing about it as well is that it takes less than 2 supers to get his Hypercharge, which is just crazy to me. So it absolutely has to be an S tier Hypercharge. So moving on to the final brawler in this ranking, we have Leon's Hypercharge. So this Hypercharge is still just crazy strong mechanically. It's one of the best for sure, because you don't reveal yourself when you shoot with your super. So if you're using smoke trails on top of this, you shred through people so quickly, and the team wipe potential is just absolutely there. The biggest drawback, of course, to Leon's super is once you shoot, you lose it completely, but you just stay invisible while shooting. And even if you're receiving damage, you stay invisible. It's crazy. It just takes a little while to cycle through to the Hypercharges now since the nerfs, but I still absolutely think this Leon Hypercharge mechanically is one of the few really OP Hypercharges in the game right now. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Let me know whether I missed out on anything. Again, I take a few things into consideration: the Hypercharge rate, the pop-off potential, and just overall whether the Hypercharge super is actually that great. Are you even going to get it? You know, brawlers like Miko, for example, you're hardly ever going to get that Hypercharge super. So that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.